Welcome to Nature Calls. Thank you for joining us, the Nature Conservancy in Alabama. TNC is 20 conservationists working together to conserve the land and water for nature and people. I'm Jessica Mitchell, Philanthropy Program Associate for TNC Alabama. Nature Calls is our virtual field trip where we share a new conservation project or site in Alabama each month on the second Thursday at 3 p.m. Before we start today's great program, I'm going to share a few housekeeping items. First, I want to let you know that we are recording this Zoom program. And second, we are muting your microphone. We ask that if you wish to comment, that you type your comment or question into the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. This makes it easier for our presenter to manage the questions and answers at the end of the presentation. This program will be approximately 15 minutes long, with another 15 minutes for questions and answers at the end. Now, I am pleased to introduce Chuck Bird, Land Steward for the Nature Conservancy in Alabama, to tell us all about reforestation. And Chuck, go ahead and take it away.
Oh, okay, cool. Hi, my name is Chuck Bird. I'm the Land Steward with the Nature Conservancy. I work with our stewardship program all over the country, all over the state, and actually into Florida. My background is in forestry and forest management, but what I've come to learn from my time here with the Conservancy and my time with the Conservancy down in South Florida was that, well, it's humbling to say, but as a forester, the really cool stuff is happening sort of from the waist down in the forest. It's the stuff on the ground, not the stuff in the canopy. That's the really cool stuff. So today's program is just going to kind of show you how, when we first acquire property, how we go about planning restoration and some of the things that we do to restore these forest types to a healthier forest. So let me share screen. All right. And all right. So let's go. The Nature Conservancy owns or manages around 5,000 acres of forest in Alabama and a little bit into Florida. These forests kind of range from industrial scale pine loblolly plantation to natural hardwoods and pretty much everything in between. Let me just first of all, when we receive a property, whether if we purchase it outright or if it's donated, we do what's called a timber cruise. It's where we take random sampling all throughout the forest to get a snapshot of the forest health and kind of get an idea of the number and the types of trees, how they're sort of spread out, if there are any large clumps or are they widely distributed across the property. We also look at the understory, because we're walking pretty much over the entire property. So we look at the understory, kind of what's there, what little plants and what habitats have potential to be there. Second, we try and look at sort of the historic nature of the forest and what should be there. We look at things like the soils, the geography, the topography. That's the sort of the rolling slopes and valleys and gullies and mountains. And we go back into the historical records, using aerial photos if we've got them, to different land soil maps and land use cover maps and things like that. And that kind of gives us a good idea of what should have been there. And so we can kind of work to go from what we have now to what we could call our desired future condition, which is actually the historic condition. And so, the thing is that once we kind of get all this data, we put it together in a forest management plan. It can be as simple as, hey, this is a great forest. It's got the right kinds of trees. It's got the right density of trees. It's got the good understory. We just need to maintain it with prescribed burning every, 1 to 3 years. But, unfortunately, more realistically, our forest plans tend to be a lot more involved between, use of selective herbicides, to mulching, to fire, to timber harvest, and then replanting with the appropriate species of trees and the appropriate number of trees. Now, I get this question a lot, well, trees are trees, why do anything? Well, if you can see on the screen, that's pretty much an industrial scale loblolly pine plantation. That is around 800 to 900 trees to the acre, and there's no sunlight hitting the ground. I mean, if your main goal is fiber production, that's what you're looking for. But in our management plans, we're trying to do whole site restoration, whole systems restoration. And so we're looking at increasing the amount of sunlight with the appropriate forest cover to really get the understory healthy, because the understory, that's the grasses, that's the forbs, that's the herbs, that's the stuff that the animals and it need to live. I know researchers that called it the grocery forest, or the forest grocery. So one of the things we do is the use of herbicides, and that's kind of it's a tough call a lot of times, because herbicides do have a negative connotation and there are risks with herbicides. But with our use of herbicides, we make sure that first and foremost starts with a good prescription. And that's chemicals, that's how it's applied, when it's applied, where it's applied, who applies it. If we don't do the work in-house, then we use trained and certified applicators to make sure that we're using the most appropriate chemical at the least effective rate. And that's key, that least effective. Because if you use herbicide at a non-effective rate, it's like taking an antibiotic but only taking half the course, and the problems are still out there. And by problems, I mean those species of trees that aren't supposed to be there. They're not supposed to be there in that density. The most effective invasive species treatments we have are herbicides. So while it's one of those things that it's difficult to get away from, but we're trying to use it as safely and respectably as possible. Again, we use everything from helicopters. They have very specific GPS systems with high quality maps, and they fly it, and to ATV backpack spraying, which is ATV or backpack spraying, which is very direct, very specific treatment to specific plants. Another thing that we like to do is mulching. Basically, it's a big piece of equipment that goes through the forest and mulches the understory. And a lot of times mulching can be very effective in areas where the mid-story has gotten to a point where it is not producing enough fuel for us to get an effective prescribed fire through it, but it's not commercially available for us so we can have somebody take it off the site and generate some revenue. It tends to be a lot lower impact. The machines a lot of times are smaller than traditional logging equipment. They're more designed for lower ground pressure. They actually work really well for areas like at Splinter Hill, where we've had properties that are full of gallberry and things like that, that we go in with a mulcher, we mulch it, and then the sunlight is able to hit the ground, and then we get our desirable species, our pitcher plants, things like that come back. It's a more direct treatment. A lot of times we'll follow it up with fire once we get sort of the fuel in the ground and turn it into something more burnable. The sort of the downsides of that is that because you are running a piece of equipment across your ground, it's a higher cost. You're having to basically run that machine over everything you want to treat. And there are limited numbers of quality contractors. I mean, everybody and their brother's got a bush hog or a skid steer, but the quality contractor is what we're really looking for, especially in some of the really sensitive areas that we work in. These are a couple of types of machines. The skid steer On the right-hand side of the on the screen, it's a more, maneuverable piece of equipment. It's got carbide tip drums, and they can basically just run and run over, the mid-sized shrubs and things like that. It's a little bit more flexible, and it's a lot cheaper. The one on the left, it's called, well, it's a swinged tree. It's colloquially known as a brontosaurus. It's got a flat disc that spins really high RPMs, and they can take down full-size trees. We've used things like that in the Paint Rock Valley when we're doing hardwood wetland restoration projects. And if it is big enough that mulching would not be as effective, or where we can potentially generate some revenue off the shrubs and trees we're trying to remove off the property, we'll use commercial timber harvest. And it's timber harvest is one of those things. It's a very specific tool. Being a nonprofit, we're not profit driven when we do timber harvest. We're restoration driven, but it is a good side benefit of trying to get the end forest type, the desirable future condition out of these forests. When we do this, we make sure we're using good contractors that follow our plans, and that are following all the state and state guidelines, the BMPs, the best management practices, to make sure that no impacts are gone, none of the wetlands or sensitive areas are impacted. I'm a forester. We've got a couple other foresters on staff, and we want to make sure that we're using the best science out there when we plan these harvests. And, we stick with it. We're just not, we're out there weekly or sometimes daily if they're working in sensitive areas, just to make sure the loggers are following our plan and they're using the best available techniques. And, when those trees roll off the property, they do generate income. Not as much as they used to, but that's one of those things. The income from the timber sales gets rolled back into our stewardship for the restoration of the project, whether it be reforestation cost, our time and salaries to mark the sales, to administer the sales, to actually help fund the restoration on the ground. The two basic types of timber sales that we do are marked or selected harvest. And that's basically where we as staff go in before the sale, before we even put it up for sale. We mark individual trees that we want to leave. That can guarantee that we're leaving the type of stand with the type of trees that we want to leave. Just so it's not as random or as haphazard. We know what we're leaving, we know what we're taking, and we get a much better project from it. The other kind is more traditional reforestation harvest or clear cut. That's where, if we have an industrial stand of loblolly pine that we basically clear cut the whole thing, remove all the standing timber, and that allows us to more easily go in and change that into a desirable future condition of longleaf, or in some cases hardwood. Clear cuts are a little bit more challenging in the sense that you have to make sure your plan is good, but we'll get into that in a second. This is from Roberta Case Pine Hills Preserve. This is a marked timber stand. The blue paint, it's a clay-based biodegradable paint. Lasts a couple of years, but it's a leaf tree. And those are the trees we're going to leave. And we make sure that we're hitting the appropriate densities before and after. And that is a different view of the same stand. And that is after the timber sale. You can notice that, granted, this one's in winter, but the number of the types of needles, the volume of needles, the density. It's really there's not a lot of understory, so it's not that good productive herbs and forbs that we want to see out there. And that's super grassy. You've got some low shrubs. That's just a happy forest because you see all that sunlight hitting the ground. This is an aerial photo from that same sale. That's the before picture, and that's the after picture. Now, if you keep in mind that the sunlight is the main driver for a lot of these ecosystems, see if we can go back. See how dense and thick that is. The dark green is the tree canopies. That's primarily loblolly with scattered longleaf. And the light green, you can actually, if you kind of look at it, you can actually see that the light green area is grasses and other desirable vegetation, and the trees are what's left. You'll notice this area here was we put a buffer on. It was a gully, a erosion drain, so to speak, and we made sure that when we marked that area and excluded it from the timber harvest. So the loggers had to plan their movements across the property to avoid impacting that drain. And that is a typical clear cut. That was actually down at Blueberry Hill a couple of years ago. It was an industrial planted loblolly stand. It was approximately 28 to 30 years old. We, decided that there was nothing salvageable in that stand as far as the tree canopy goes. So we did a clear cut, and we came back and replanted it with longleaf. What's interesting about that property is that we were working in conjunction with the U.S. Forest Service because this land was surrounded by the Okmulgee district of the Talladega National Forest. And we were using their seedling vendors, their planting densities to make sure that basically we were trying to get a relatively seamless stand of trees. So, when the Forest Service purchased that property from us, it's basically like, something they would do, but at about 3 times as fast and probably half as cheap. So the trick with the clear cuts is that you have to do a lot of pre-planning, not only the forest management plan, but also, you have to, after you remove the trees, you have to plan for site preparation for planting the longleaf in North Alabama, the hardwoods. And a lot of times we'll use combinations of a very specific herbicide cocktail or prescription. Fire occasionally works by itself, or sometimes we'll use both of those to make sure that the planting bed is really prepared. And we have to make sure that the seedlings that we order up to a year in advance are the correct type. Like when we're planting in central North Alabama, we make sure the seed source from those trees that are planted in nurseries around the state are from the montane longleaf. When we're working in coastal plain, there's a lot more varieties of coastal plain longleaf that we can order, but there's a few montane longleaf industrial seedling vendors that we can go through. Typically, the non-industrial private forest land owner will plant around 700 to 800 trees to the acre. Because we're not planning to generate income from from the timber in the future, plant about 450 to 500 trees to the acre. That allows us to have a healthy forest density that's more typical of probably what you would have found in the Native American times, while allowing for a lot of sunlight to hit the ground even as those trees get older. What do we plant? Primarily the 2 species of trees that we plant here in Alabama are longleaf. And that's a containerized longleaf. It looks like a dirt carrot. Those are grown about a year in advance. They're grown in plastic pots, basically, on an industrial scale. And they're planted at about, a year after we've gone in and site prep the area. Those those are actually really good. They come in about 1,000 boxes per 1,000 per box. And on the right-hand side is is a hardwood seedling. It looks like a stick because we plant these in the winter, and this is about the time when we'd be getting to plant. And basically, it's just a stick with some roots. Primarily in North Alabama and some of the wetland reserve programs, we plant the hardwoods. It's really gratifying when you plant longleaf. You can see the green, nice green tufts coming up. But when you plant hardwoods, you just see basically a row of sticks. Why do we do this? Well, the old adage is that, you know, if you build it or rebuild it, they will come. A healthy forest and an understory support is the goal of any restoration projects that we take on. And, you know, what determines that is good science and staying focused on making sure that our goals are clear, we have long range plans, and that we know where we want to go in the desired future conditions. And that is actually what we're shooting for. That is Alan Kressler's a local friend of ours. That's down in St. Mark's, down in Florida. But that is a healthy forest, longleaf forest. Any questions?
Chuck, that was awesome. So much interesting information that you don't think about when you're just thinking about the idea of put some trees in the ground.
Yeah.
So we do have a few questions we're going to try and get through. The first was while you were talking about herbicides, you get the question of, do you use glyphosates?
Glyphosates. Yes, we actually have to. The Kogan grass is one of the most invasive species in Central and South Alabama that we've run into. That's an invasive grass that tends to carpet. And glyphosate is really, really good and effective at killing Kogan grass. I would much rather not have Kogan grass and not use glyphosate, but unfortunately, a friend of mine kind of described it as chemo. Sometimes the cure is, it's kind of harsh, but the disease is potentially worse because Kogan grass is actually more aggressive than kudzu, and it's killing a lot of great habitat.
Okay. We got a question from John. As you know, my place is in a conservation easement. However, one of the donors was insistent that we not do forest management. He wanted old growth forests. Can you explain the pros and cons of that approach?
Well, we actually have several preserves that are old growth forest, hardwood forest traditionally, or what you consider old growth. And, you know, if Mother Nature's taking care of business and doing what she needs to do, then we don't need to go in there. A lot of times we're going into areas that are highly degraded. They've been beat up for the last 100 years or so, and we're having to go in and sort of work them back to getting into more of a, you know, natural, desired, a healthy ecosystem.
Okay. In hardwood restoration, what tree species do you most often plant?
Well, depending on where we're at, and if we're looking at bottomland species or sort of mid-story, oaks a lot of times are very popular. The red oaks, white oaks. At our winter preserve, we had a suite of hardwoods. There were some poplars, oaks, a mixture of the different soft and hard hardwoods, maples, things like that. We found that you don't have to actually plant sweet gums because they come up regardless of what you're doing. And in certain forests, like, you know, maples will come up, but they're either too many maples or the wrong species of maple. And, you know, so we'll have to go in there and kind of, when we do our seedling orders, we'll make sure we get the right species. So primarily oaks and, you know, tulip poplars.
Okay. And I'm gonna do one last question. In an understory, what should be there?
That's a good question. Depending on where you're at, like in central Alabama, you're going to see a lot of the blue stem grasses, low bush blueberries, things like that. Different vacciniums and you know, smaller sort of shrubs. In the coastal plain, you're going to see things like wiregrass, which is predominantly where you see the gopher tortoise habitats and things like that. There are a lot of other grass species. There are just so many grasses and sedges. It's basically, and a lot of times we found that if we get good fire going and we get sunlight on the ground, like at Roberta Case, the pictures I was showing you, we'd been burning that forever, but the forest density was such that it was just not allowing the understory to really kick in and do good. So when we removed the trees, we got good sunlight on the ground, and our fire just basically refreshed the grasses and sedges and stuff that were just dying to come out.
Okay. And if you have time, we have one more question.
Sure.
For private landowners who want to manage their land like TNC might, what steps should they take?
Again, depends on what you start with, but you can work with a consulting forester and let them know that you're into conservation forestry. When I went through forestry school several years ago, there wasn't a lot of focus on conservation forestry. The old joke was, is your forestry program green? It was, yes, money is green. But nowadays there's a lot more science coming out and showing professional forestry students how to manage for a good, healthy forest. And there are certain old school professionals that are out there doing it. You can also talk to the Forestry Commission. They can potentially help you write a forest management plan. Basically, if it looks like a park, if it's got sunlight hitting the ground, and you can see more than 50 feet, it's probably pretty good, as long as it's not all Kogut.
Fair enough. Well, Chuck, you did an amazing job. And to our audience, if any of you have additional questions about this particular subject or anything else, you can always reach out to us at philanthropy.alabama@tnc.org. We'll get you in touch with whoever you need to answer your questions. And really quickly, I'm going to steal the screen. All right. Okay, and I just want to say thank you so much for joining all of us. No matter what is happening in the world, our work continues uninterrupted. Conservation never stops. And we need your support to keep conservationists in the field doing their important work for people and for nature. So please donate to the Nature Conservancy in Alabama. It's easy. You can send us a brief email at philanthropy.alabama@tnc.org. And we will reply with a link for online donations or a guide to you for sending your donations via mail or any other method that you might choose to use to donate. Thank you in advance for your tax-deductible financial contribution, and invite someone to join you for the next Nature Calls on January 14th at 3 p.m. Just forward them the invitation that you receive in your email inbox, or you can share their contact information with us if they're okay with that, and we will invite them on your behalf. And again, thank you everyone for joining us for Nature Calls, and thank you so much, Chuck, for taking the time to explain reforestation to us.
Thank you.
Thanks.